So I'm really excited to have heard a sound. I have Xeres with us today, and this is the third time that we have tried to record a YouTube video for my channel. So I am excited and thrilled to finally have her here. Yes, very excited. Xeres?
Yes.
Just want to make sure that you're okay, because I'm just checking the settings. This is the first time I've used this program for the recording. So I don't know a lot about your background, so I'm gonna let you introduce yourself. I just wanted to, so the channel's theme is no ticket backwards. So there's like those moments in life, whether it's like an event from outside or it's a realization that comes from the inside, when we know that there's no going back to the way things used to be and they're gonna change forever. And like sometimes it's exciting and sometimes it's dreadful and all the things in between. And you have been talking a lot about going back, but going back in the sense of reclaiming things. And I am so
Mhm.
excited to have you like talk about some of this because like the way you lit up when we first tried to record it or a second time. Anyway, one of the times we've tried to record this. So I'm gonna stop talking and let you talk
That's all
about who
right.
you are, what you do, and yeah, we'll go from there.
My name is Xeres. I love to eat out. I have two cute little, fur babies, a cat and a
Mm-hmm.
dog. The nerd hard love reading. It, I mean, in personal development and culture nerd and so socioeconomic nerd. Well, what I'm doing is that by day I worked in the family business in you know business and accounting development more on that side. But what I do in general is I'm a spiritual activist, and uh, a community organizer. And as far as business goes, is I am working as a as a as a solo vocation guide, supporter of genius, and an and what I consider myself like an oracle and medicine woman to other medicine and other women and leaders. But it's really good at heart to help them be in their genius, in their and creating their own standards of success, their own opportunities that are not always uncovered for them, and as a way of reclaiming their lineage themselves, their lineage, and their soul in many ways. Which is why, like, even though it is mostly about like being their genius and wealthy reimagination and success reimagination and community development
Can you
reimagination, it's
Can you talk about what those types of like when you're saying reimagination, can you kind of explain what that is?
it's yeah, it's more like of recognizing that some of the either mainstream or someone else is it's like learning that it's not you.
Mm,
And then you realize that what could be different, or what experiences do I want to bring in
where you can
to
actually like actively curate what your life is doing instead of just like
yes.
bouncing around what you inherited or what you've kind of cobbled together,
Yeah, yeah, you're
whatever
curating
applies.
it, but you're not curating it, you're
Mm.
co-curating it with all of life.
Ooh, I love that so much, co-curating with all of life. So if somebody is kind of just living in their default settings, whether it's like just their like who they kind of created themselves to be, family, influence, social influence, religious influence, like all the influences. There's so many influences. Um, and then they decide to go into their zone of genius. Like that is a massive change for somebody to undergo in their life. Like that,
Right.
like you have to change so many things, some big things. Like you may change where you live, you may change how you work, you may change how you do finances. But it can change little things too, like what your hobbies are or how you think about certain people. Like there's these big changes and little changes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those kinds of changes can be stressful, especially it's like a person wants change, but they've struggled with change, so they're resistant to it. So when you're working with people, how do you kind of guide them to be in their zone of genius when it's like they have programming to the opposite?
And they're at a level where they have already ways to be in touch with themselves and with people and relationships that help them see who they are already.
Got
But
it.
at the
Okay.
level where they're meeting me, it's more like, how did I not fully own that I'm proactively innovating and co-creating life at this point as a way of approaching change to a deeper
Mhm.
zone of genius. At the like I made a decision to do that, already, but how can I start from a co-creative place? From they're not like, I'm not sure how, because this is something that they sometimes don't realize that that you're doing, not only doing something new, you're doing something that is a social and identity shift. It is
Yeah.
into a more co-creative role and more both expanding the receptivity and expanding the co-creation of being more of themselves, being more of more in touch with the world, and not less. Both the incarnation and the extended, but now as like, oh, sorry for my phone. But of stepping into a way of cycle breaking and creating a life a way of life as as a pioneer of their own life, you know as of
Okay.
their own life, of taking the what they have taken or evolved so far, as well as the cycle breaking level that they are, and now they're taking it, and so they're not like, how can I sustain that genius?
Okay.
And create the changes to sustain it, to create my own thing, to go to make it through the next identity shift.
All right. So I just want to repeat this back to you and kind of just like see if it lands or if I need
Mm-hmm.
clarification.
So
Because
yeah, that's fine.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, so we get in the middle of our journey and it's like the prescriptive path, like, you can see a therapist, you can work with a coach, like you can get so far. And then it's just like sometimes you get in the middle where you're like, where am I actually going? Am I following my own path? Am I following someone else's path? And sometimes I feel like that's the most overwhelming confusion because it's like you followed a certain path so far, but you're in the middle of it and you're not quite sure if it works off and you're like, I have no idea if worked it because it's like beyond what you know. So what I'm hearing you say is you work with people that already like not people that are at the beginning of looking for their zone of genius. Like they've already got some tools under their belt. So they may have breathing techniques, they may have
Mm-hmm.
nervous system regulation, meditation, like so many different tools, like healing tools, whatever they use to kind of move themselves through their change. So they're not newbies in changing their life path, but they've gone far enough that they've outgrown most of what they have to go by. And so you help create like guidance to help them get in touch with themselves to be able to move further steps on that journey. Is that
Yeah,
close?
that's right. It's further now
Okay.
to fully that the next level is be is the one of being the author of their own life, while simultaneously be fully more in a health with a more supportive relationship with the universe,
I
with
love that.
like
Okay.
learning to reclaim your relationship with the universe, which is the ancestry, the culture that you get to reclaim that just as much as yourself
Can
now.
you can you talk about that? Like something about that is just ringing bells, like the ancestry. What do you mean by that?
It's both the blood and the relationships that initiate who you are, and now you are not looking at it by condition deep, but that you could see the unique wealth and resources and gifts that you can use
Wow.
to be yourself, like of all the collective support that you can intentionally run into, not just to go back, but to be like, hey, this is something, an aspect of an important identity that amplifies the deeper truth of myself. I don't have to, that is both within the living and the dead. I don't have to look what is always default all the time, or what's like mainstream support all the time to look into it. Now that I can quote be the author of my own life, I can get a different level of support that is beyond of what is expected, what is assumed to be.
I love that so much because it's like when people think of ancestor veneration, I'm thinking more from a Western lens. Like there's so many indigenous and Eastern practices that really have very, very strong ancestor veneration. And then also like within the West, there's, people that practice it. But it's been lost with a lot of like, well, with colonialism, honestly, like
Yeah, yeah.
settler mentality. And I think that a lot of people may feel a hesitation to tap into their ancestors because they can be like, oh, my ancestors were terrible. And what I'm
Yeah.
hearing you say is that there's good, even if you come from ancestors that you may not want to claim. It like, am I hearing you correctly? Like, I don't want to put
Yeah,
words.
close to that. What I can expand on it is that there will always be ranges of people within it living and alive, and blood or by infinity. That in that and relation that you that is not personally due. That's just how you personally honor yourself. But it doesn't take
Mm,
away the spiritual and cultural and material gifts that the spirit of that lineage has given you, that you can also own, and other people that can also belong to you, not be choosing away from the problematic people in your life so much. Although no contact is a legit way to respect your own lineage, like believe respect not only you but it's also a way to how uh, a lineage or a culture or of a continuation line that it that there's deep to say, because and I'm hearing communicating that this is more about like evolving to a much more harmonious like flow, you know.
mm.
So understanding the pop and conscious is just understanding the flow of how do we keep it flow. Some generations didn't due to reasons. That then the way it is responded is not always pleasant. It's survival, but it doesn't mean that the impact. So it's this continual of intentionally li- like liberating the flow of your lineage, rather or not you have children or not, rather or not you're necessary or just by relation and not by blood or not. it is with that situation. It's just revealing of where the flow has stopped and how can you choose to keep the flow. Like first, liberate yourself first. Otherwise, like without yourself, like how it's out of order in how to liberate your lineage and your soul and the collective soul of your lineage, and what I can say about that as someone who has complicated like family members myself, like a lot
Mhm.
of people who are intentionally want to proactive in bringing, not only love to yourself but love to your lineage, to your communities, whether by blood, by relation. The refrain I can get is seeing those kind of people and accomplices to settler colonialism, all that, to whatever heinous thing you could think of. It's more like looking at, oh, this is consequences of what it's like harm not unattended in your lineage in the world. That this is where what could we do to, you know, free, so that free to what kind of freedom do I want to choose now? Not as a thing to push them away or think you're not them, but also not as a way to be enmeshed. Just like
That's really powerful.
what can I, if think of it like, how do I nurture an ecosystem? There it is a type of ecosystem. Like how do I see that as like what is with the overall ecosystem that needs to be reweaved, to be harmonized, wound tended to, starting with freeing myself. Starting
That
with
was so
that's
powerful.
it. Yeah, really. That is
Can I? So, like, I love this so much. And when you were talking about being an oracle and a medicine woman, I'm like, this is the stuff. Like, I'm just like, this is so great. Um, can I kind of paraphrase what I took from what you said? Just kind of
yeah,
like
it's of
from it as a
course.
reframe, just because it, like, I think it's delicious and I want to keep it in my like remembering.
Of
Okay,
course. You're
so
welcome.
yeah, no, it's really powerful because it's like, okay, when we have problematic ancestors, like we recognize that sometimes they did the best they could with what they had. Trauma was present, like intergenerational, like there's I know trauma gets thrown around a lot, but obviously if people are wounding, they're wounded because it's like hurt people. So just because there's hurt in an ancestor line, you don't have to throw the whole lineage away. Like there's still value and there's still gifts. So the first thing to do is really work on yourself and freeing yourself, the liberation for yourself you were saying, and like with love. And then being able to incorporate the gifts because there are always gifts. Like even if you see that there's like a bunch of not desirable things, there are still desirable things. Sometimes you just have to look more. Like um like if you have a family line that has a lot of abuse and a lot of like not a lot of love and like all of that stuff, you don't have to be enmeshed with it, what you were saying, like you don't have to keep replaying it. And at the same time, the whole thing doesn't have to be thrown away. Like there could still be value. Like maybe there's a sense of purpose or there's a sense of determination that comes from that line that you can like bring into your own life. So you can actually pick and choose. Like when you get to the place where you're co-creating with the universe and you're the author of your life, those are both terms that you've used.
Mm-hmm.
You can curate from your own ancestors, like your own lineage, to take forward what you want, and you don't have to keep bringing the crap along with you.
No, you don't have to get the crap. They're not defined by that either, any more than
Mm,
that. The soul of it either. And you're coming up on multiple streams of thought. So it's to anchor in that. And part of that is what initiate that. And I never thought I would be into this, but it was necessity because after my grandmother passed away in 2014, which was like in early 20, closer to early to mid 20s, but it was 5 years after like renal failure, and then
Wow.
why, because of untreated like hypertension in our family. And but the short version, that that particular side of the family, her my mother's side of the family, has always been complicated, has coped with things like I mean, to understand just a little bit, just even on that scale, not even like the other three. You get, and those are well, but even well, they're not less effective by the things happening to them and the choices of coping with social political stuff and
Mm.
cultural norms, and they developed in their response. The my eyelid, where the known as the Philippines, that's been through just the last 100 years, not even going back like the first 600 years of Spanish colonization. It's like
Oh man.
right from Spain, then occupied by Americans in laws, and then by the Japanese, and then the dictate of Marcos, and then you got all the multiple ethnic Austrian ethnic groups that are also coexisting in the islands, have different territory within it, while under dictatorship for like under dictatorship in since the late 60s until when I was born. And the way they cope with that, and it's wild that it's different, for both all four of them. And in this case, my mother, this didn't always uh, treat each other well in response to not just the background of that, but also like what they handle with um with war, poverty, with like what they do to survive, not necessarily, and much as well, a lot of picking financial abuse from that family. Like so, and then they made why that my unlike the other side siblings of my dad's siblings and my other's siblings, it's not are not siblings and first cousins of her mother line, are just like fighting peacocks.
Mm.
That's causing so much suffering and misery, even with the money that didn't quail that away. Anything invite more jealousy and anything else, or projection, anything else. They kind of get mean at you when you're poor, and then they now see you as a villain when you're doing well. And that's kind of like coming from that. And growing up and seeing how it affects my mother, how it affects like the dynamic, which I had learned the hard way in adulthood. I'm like, and then when my grandmother passed away, it's like, how do I understand like this going on? Like what? The, so it was the long of really understand like what is this turmoil of feeling like not okay with this toxicity of pulling each other down and being like patriarchy and and wanting to keep people in place because you don't want them to do better than you, or you feel jealous. It really, this wisdom comes from, honestly, like overseeing the the long-term effect, and it's me wanting to understand myself of not to replicate that, or finding my own way of doing it. And it's also a way of a long journey of unlearning, because in the context of Asian American and those who did succeed, you get your success can be weaponized to put you in the box of either respectability or being a horse race person or a model minority person that they'll use so that they can make the other people look bad.
Wow.
That they don't know, that they can't replicate their own success themselves, and but then they want to use art that make and really. And
Yep.
my family is like, how do I, and it's so this how do I really honestly understand, how do I be my own person in the midst of
Yeah.
that familiar thing, and then this habit of, weaponizing certain things in such a way where you're just a tool for someone's triangulation, because that experience, racial experience. So it's like, I don't know what to do with that. So that's why I talk about the way I do, because it's because of like wanting to embody a different ethic, and I have no choice but to try to understand it.
That's so much. I love that you shared because I know that some of that's really personal, but when you said 600 years in Spain and like it just hit me like that's and it was like the 600 years Spain was coming out of the auto de fe and the Inquisition, and it's like people talk about the witch hunts, but it was like those were as bad as any witch hunt, but it isn't included in like the witch hunt era or whatever. And so it was like Spain was in an incredibly brutal era when it came to the Philippines and when Magellan got there and all that stuff. And then when you listed all of the different, like Spain for hundreds of years, and then the US, and then Japan, and then you were saying other pieces of history I don't even think I was aware of in the Philippines. Like,
Yeah, the dictatorship of a man who is kind of a self-hater, wealthy
mhm.
self-hater. And anyways, it's just like, it's whose son is now in office. It's very devastating.
Was that who
That
was just elected, like just barely?
it's barely. So this is kind of it, and so that's when I'm like, I just want to create something different. That's all I was driven
Yeah.
by. Driven
Well,
by.
it makes sense. So it's like all of the intergenerational trauma for centuries of different layers, and then coming here and it's like the racial components and being tokenized and like all of those things. That's a lot. So I can see why it's so important for you to be able to be in your own zone of genius and for you to be able to curate your own life and self-author where you're going, because it's you don't want to have to keep repeating that. And it's
Right.
like on like I want to share a little personally because it's like
No, no. Yeah, go ahead.
um so I did have ancestors that came over with the Puritans and settled in Massachusetts and Connecticut like in the
Mm-hmm.
late 1600s, and they were religiously dogmatic. And it's kind of interesting because like when the 1830s rolled around they converted to Mormonism, and then they went through like they traveled west, and the Mormons had several different places that they tried to settle, like in Illinois, like all over the place. And they weren't allowed in the community because they were a closed community. So then they would move into this frontier town, and they wouldn't mesh well with the locals, so they would like kind of be kicked out. It's a lot more violent than that, and also displacing
Mm-hmm.
Native Americans as they're going along. So it's like there's that history, and then they finally landed in Salt Lake. So it's like a lot of colonial and settler um, background with this angst of like spiritual unfulfillment and always looking for the next right thing, and incredible amounts of oppression that came along with that spiritual. And I'm not saying anything about what people believe, but um I'm like I consider myself spiritual, but I don't ascribe to a religion. And it's kind of like when you're talking about being on the side where you've been under different colonial powers and different settlements coming in, and it's empires trying to like take it, the oppression piece, and then the other side where it's like being the oppressor piece. And it's like there's shame and anger and frustration on both sides because it's like
Mhm,
nobody
mhm,
should be oppressed. And when you're an oppressor, I don't care what you like. I will fight. This is a hill I will. It takes away pieces of your own humanity. Like
mm,
you're less in your humanity if you're oppressing other people, and it isn't that easy. But at the same time, it kind of is that easy. And so it's like in the future, what future are we creating? Like, are we going to allow people to really move into their zone of geniuses and really inhabit their spirit, their full, like their soulfully incarnated selves in a body? Or are we going to just keep regurgitating the crap that our ancestors did? And I really love that you're like, no, you start with yourself because I can't change my ancestors, I can't change my family members, but I can work on myself. And then from that, hopefully there's like like a ripple out, right? But even that's beyond
mhm,
my control. But like to free yourself from that, the legacy that you have had, like, but there's so much good part in it too, because there's like this magical resilience to always like continuing and continuing and continuing and facing
mhm,
hardship and still coming out. And it's sad when you see like family systems break down under the pressure of oppression. Like absolutely. And I'm always amazed at people's resilience. Like not as
mhm,
a platitude, but like I
mhm,
really am
mhm.
in awe that people can overcome so much.
It's and I can say that that's a similar thing. Someone that's and it is so fascinating because it's also this part of that is a reflection of different souls coven within lineages and what that to do with to do with that. It's it's a paradox of like there's a lot. No one's a blank slate. Even that's like there's a lot to do with within those things, and what you can break out of, and with the resilience piece, it's always the drive. The everyone's drive to survive is always going to be the big one, like within any group of human beings, regardless of what background you are. Like the drive to survive. Some ways just it is really always the what is the most evolutionary, most adaptive, not the fittest. It could be physically fit, but if it doesn't help you evolve, like it's not and into a free human, then you're not gonna live anywhere. Live that much anywhere. Like in contrary to the eugenics people who want to believe the superior who's the superior genes believed, and like it's actually who is the most co-creative and adaptive. Not so
That's
much who
possible.
has the perfect health. Like so much. Not really. And not really, and not everyone the not to the fault of their own, but it's also look at which is why his most of the time we work in, using our environment and groups a lot because of the or creative adaptability part, not so much because of that. And contrary to people who want to reinforce superior complexes, no, it's always the most co-creative, the most adaptive, the most innovative person in the room that ends up surviving the best. If nothing else, surviving the best in general, even though there may be battle scars that come with it, which is something to not always, fetishize about. But yeah, oh, in general, not always innovate survive. It's just more like adaptive, general adaptive, who can adapt, who can create an innovative approach to adapting, and it's usually that in anything else. And I think that speaks to that aspect, and it's one of those things where honestly, it's a mystery, even as someone who myself, like how someone not just the resilience, but the sense of innovation and adaptability, because people have strong to survive, assumingly that there's no systemic barriers, and not, and which is why most of the time it's the best ones of any species is how they cooperate and help each other adapt and innovate. Really, it's not so much of like one alone, because if you're alone and the environment's dead and you don't have feedback on that gets you to evolve in relationship, whether it's with the animal or with another human being, um, you're not gonna get very far in living in your fruition until you live. Which is why it's so it does it is it is a bit of a mystery, but the only thing that's common is willing to co-create with everything
Mm,
around you.
that
If your survival mechanisms lead you to that path, not every survival mechanism is going to lead that, because everybody's going to develop it. It's natural to do that. I mean, if without it, everybody would be unnecessarily dead. Which, contrary to most, like in certain fields, like survival mechanism is not the most efficient. There's a reason why we learn to not rely on them as we become more functioning adults, but it is the most adaptive use to get you to where you to get you to work with everything you get. It's the most way of that adapts the best. It's about
can I
that. Yeah. And so it's really like, to finish, it's like what survival mechanisms that you develop over time, whatever environment, of any environment that leads you to be on the co-creation path. That enough that when you're not on it, you can learn to drop them.
I think you're blowing my mind a little. Okay, so how does pursuing your zone of genius play into that adaptability piece?
It's more like the I think for me and growing myself, it all depends on many factors of a person or a community or a group of people. It's a lot of it, or the way free will, their agency and being influenced interact. It depends. Part of zone of genius is more about like discovering what helps you be in touch with your aliveness and what's
Mm,
honoring your function and form that is both effective, efficient, and at an energetic return and investment, not in a sense where it is a positive regenerative energetic loop. That you're worth learning, that you're worth that you it's more like recognizing that you are meant to be like whatever fauna or plant you are. Like humans are kind of in their zones of gene, and there's different types of zones that humans can have. Like we could have multiple pounds for multiple things, but the piece of zone of genius and the focus, like your own evolving vision and your own evolving compass, and as well as zone of genius is like it's I always think of it through deep mentorship of that taught me, that gave me space for ancestral hate, that gave me space for deeper purpose for my own before even talking about something like this is think yourself as like the plants and animals of the ecosystems and the living creatures. Like the living creatures are being who they are and evolving, being fully who they are, and the things that they do to contribute to those ecosystems until some part of your shifts or some of that shit. Like if you're in like in the jungle, like if you're I know for a fact I'm just using Los Angeles as around like right now at my house in my compound, like we have like sometimes we have hummingbirds in the office and we have it's a concrete jungle, but in this case it's like
Mhm.
fairyland here in the midst of a concrete jungle with of in the townhouse compound with where I live around. We um we sometimes the stray cats come and sometimes there's a possum and but if you look at each and every hell have different particular birds that makes a possum that and the evolution of a possum the evolution of a possum is not done the evolution of a cat the evolution of a dog it's the deeper of more of who they are and who they get to in working with the environment that they have. It's so by zoology is more understanding of I think plant when you see like plants and animals and insects and things, they're always it's more always about amplifying what's core for them in their that can make them co-creators of the ecosystems that they're living in like bees when there's because if the bee doesn't see a plant it will go somewhere as a plant it just uses its own vision and sensing that's unique to a bee but that will not be found in a fruit fly that will not be found in a fruit fly. So part of zonergy is really understand your own unique makeup of you and the way energies and environments amplify parts of you while coming into your own agency of your own facilities, your own thing, and intentionally becoming have more agency and not only the type of influences you want to receive, but also the type of way you're influencing something. Like and with intention with this. So Jesus just really like the way you recognize, like I recognize understanding my dog's a Yorkie. Yorkie, and understanding the journey of how this Yorkie came to be, of my current Yorkie, because I have a Yorkshire dog named Precious, like, well, it
Mhm.
came to be, and the breed of Yorkshire Terriers and the Terrier dogs, like, a little bit. And it's not like, has to be super adept, but it's like, yeah, they're just recognize that this is a dog. It's like a lot of dogs and their wild counterparts. They're very, group community minded. They sensory minded.
Well,
They
and they're
understand
bred for
relationships.
they're
Yeah,
bred for
like that's
different
an example
purposes.
of that. That's just an example, like understanding that
Yeah.
level. And it doesn't have to be like super PhD level deep necessarily. Just the
No.
ability to do that.
So it's just
That
like the nature, like certain dogs were bred for certain things. So like the terriers are like like they would hunt rats and mice and vermin, whereas like a German Shepherd was not meant like they are a working dog, and like Australian Shepherds are shepherd dogs. Like so dogs were bred for certain purposes, and that's like knowing you have a working dog, it's important that it gets enough exercise so it doesn't go stir crazy and create damage. Whereas like a Yorkie doesn't need to have the same exercise that like a Belgian Malinois, or I don't know if you say that right, but like they're so active. They're like the Jackie Chans of the dog world. Like they
okay,
have a very
like
different
tell me,
need as
yeah.
far as like so knowing the nature of something makes a lot of sense. So what I'm kind of hearing, and this is just for my own integration because I think this is such a brilliant conversation. Um like your zone of genius may have some crossover with a path that's adaptable, but they're not necessarily one and the same. The zone of genius has more aliveness, more agency, more intention, whereas adapting to survive that is the intention, is adapting to survive.
That
Am
is it.
I am
That's
I
a
hearing that?
yeah.
Is
That's
that
intention to survive because it's is what intention would you adapt to survive you do with? Is it to conform less of yourself or to a way of being a way of being your own energy? Those are two different approaches to adaptability. Those are two different. I
yeah,
mean,
wow. That's wow.
because it
There
yeah, because especially when if you're a recovering people pleaser, you have not seen real giving and generosity, but the type of giving that's like losing yourself, or
mm,
you betray someone else, or you betray yourself to give dynamic. It's kind of hard to imagine adaptability that's not all about like or stealth, or adaptability that's not all about like losing yourself or abandoning yourself or making or choosing between things all the time. But adaptability is what approach of anything,
yeah.
which I have to be mindful of too, as a recovering people pleaser, recovering workaholic,
Mm,
recovering like swinging disorganized attachment that can go from overworking and then no momentum, nothing to nothing. Is like what approach, which is a better question than how. How is important, but an aligned how starts with what approach I want to take first. A lot of the time.
oh my gosh. Can I just say that in personal development and healing fields, the what approach sometimes gets so overlooked. Like if you're building a business, you can do it the hard way, you can do it the pleasurable way, you can do it the predictable way, you can do it the unpredictable way. Like the hows are endless. And I don't mean how and like what you are, but like the approach matters. And I was thinking about that the other day. Like just because you have a goal, the how you want to get to that goal, the path that you want to take, the approach you want to take is just as important, if not because more, because it's the journey, right? So it's like if I'm like, oh, I want to go on vacation in the Philippines. We'll go to, since you mentioned the Philippines. Do I want to take a cruise? Do I want to take an airline? Do I want to take a bus to California and then do one of like there's so many ways that I could go about planning a trip to the Philippines, and the trip there is as important as like reaching the goal of being in the Philippines. And then like when I get there, like do I want to be on the beach? Do I want to go sightseeing? Do I want to have a high-powered vacation or do I want to have a chill vacation? So it's like the approach of what you're doing is the meat of what you're doing. Like the goal is just the name of it. It's just the title. And I feel like so many times people forget just how important it is to actually choose the approach. And I guess like for me, that's where the agency
Yeah, it's
comes
not
in.
getting to how is not ironically not caring about how, it's caring about the approach and the energy
Mhm.
and the pathway that you want to experience as your the destination experience, not necessarily the how. That's when the how will reveal itself. I learned this the hard way as someone who like a lot of the culture taught like how to content, which is still important because you want step by step, but it's the energy behind the step by step that leave people frustrated, and then the results are
Mm,
like complete utter shit. And like and even if you get it, you're not enjoying it, and because to have and it leads to like like what, like I thought that this method for someone else is working, or I come up with the way, but how come I blah blah blah, and I'm still tempted sometimes, because it's ongoing, but the recently is, and it's an ongoing lesson, is what experience and approach I want to try and take it. Then that's when and decide on that, and that's when the how shows up. Because if you force a how from a place of fixing yourself or wanting to get out of it, which is probably the hardest thing about learning your genius, is to take it more of what is my approach and methodology to things. What is my new way of operating in methodology and sense of craft and a sense of more of a way of things rather than thinking like a formula. because then the steps will come to you as you are owning your approach to things, as you're experimenting approaches.
Well, and that's
Yeah,
also where having a guide can be really helpful, which is the kind of work that you do, because like you're talking about these paths, and what I'm hearing as you're describing how you work and like the different paths of adaptability and whether it's survival or being in your zone of genius, and it's, like all of there's more that you said that is I'd have to go back and watch it because it's like
yeah,
there's
that's
a lot
okay.
to absorb, but like it sounds to me like you're a really good guide to help somebody on this path when they're integrating their own navigation as well as what it means to navigate.
It's a really bit hard lived experience, and just seeing my own patterns and over and over of, and honoring my own neurodivergence, and that a lot
Pattern.
of times, like, because of our over culture shithole, we often weaponize the how in such a way that it ends up being like creating like a way to get people to think for you, rather than an honest
Mm.
inquiry question of learning and studying about what works and what experiences of implementation that also feels good to keep practicing and implementing and efforting out of, because
Yeah.
of our hustle culture, because of this cult of productivity, because of like any questions of how, I'm is against natural law a lot of the time, when it's about like what is about be, do, and have, but you're forced to go like do and have, and the how is serving the backwards asswipe. So and I was an overachiever, so of course I want to know the how a lot, but it's not always from good intentions. It's from like with already the background of like, I just want the answers in front of my plate, and I don't know how to
Mm.
effort in a way or figure it out a way, my own way of figuring out that where I can have the guidance and teaching and receiving downloads for someone else that I know I want to receive from, and I can make like the learning and the training easeful without removing the effort, without efforting being so cruel and horrible. So that makes you so horrible, and that's why how to contests are so popular. That's why like you don't want to blame everyone for but but it is an art thing for me to unlearn, and it's not running the how that's the problem. It's the fact that we create a way of learning and implementation that's toxic to people, and how is just a way asking the how questions just ends up being like wanting to get out of that, of not being in your genius, not honoring a way that you want to survive. And if you're like someone who's more femme of center, who's not a man, basically, and you're told, yeah, that doesn't matter, and the only time they know differences is just to reinforce inferiority, or to police you what activities you should be doing as a woman or any gender that's not a dude. Any gender that's not a dude, like telling that you can't be a martial artist and be feminine or some shit, like some bullshit like that has nothing to
Mm.
do to do with that, for example. So it's like, so of course don't we're addicted to how to's in ways.
It's true.
but
I can
but
see that.
now I want to create a way where it's more about anchoring in your own energy and your own function, and a way of optimizing that's more about creating your own unique approach that's effective and efficient, and energy investment that gets you to impact things the way you want to impact, create, to keep you in cycles of creation, cycles
Mm.
of creating your own standard of success. That doesn't have to get into the like the learning process of the flow learning cycle that is not going to be seen as like up and down hell or heaven of like if I don't produce this or else like I'm not worth anything, and if I don't know exactly like step 1 2 3 5 right away, like I can't do anything episode,
Mm,
or I'm doing nothing in my life.
that's yeah. Yeah, because sometimes we freeze out like that and then just well, I feel like this has been a lot to digest. So I do want to stop here because it feels like a natural pause. And I'm like, I'm gonna have to go back and watch this again. So that's a lot of very in-depth information. And you use tarot and I Ching and different oracles in addition to just your ability to know to know and see things,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fun. We should talk about that sometime too. But um I had an iTunes reading and it was amazing, and I loved
Thank
it. It was
you.
a very dynamic reading, and it's still giving. Um. Anyway, so yeah, are you? Do you have anything you would like to conclude with?
I think it's just, if I were to conclude anything, it's just that there are many paths to take, and your compass is a dialogue between internal and external. It's not just someone tells you or in your head or just solely within yourself. It is an ongoing dialogue of the external and internal, because you're above and so below. So it's an inside out dialogue. Just that's what I leave to your inner knowing is a dialogue between the internal and external that is always an inside out experience. And that's all I want to leave with. Just note that.
That's a really good note to end it on. Well, thank you so much, and I'll put your information in the description so people can see if they want to contact you or have more. And yeah, I think it'd be fun at some point to do a recording on iTunes.
Yeah, I don't mind recording a little bit on iTunes. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that'd be
thank you
awesome.
for having me. I
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you.
it. And I didn't always know what to say. And I
Oh,
just, it gets up depending on what questions or what to answer. And it is, you know, that just ends up flooding the floodgate today. But I'm grateful. I am so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful to
mhm.
channel whatever message I have
Yeah,
and help and pray for like have this potent like transmission to be of service is what I pray for.
same. And I really do believe that like information that needs to come through does, because it's like you can it's not on script, and so it's like sharing what feels like is the most potent. And I feel like this is really potent. I also feel like it might take a little bit of time for the dialogue to catch up, or for like frame of reference to catch up to the dialogue. Like I feel like this is very avant-garde somehow, and I don't know what I mean by that, but like I feel like this is a conversation that people will be growing into, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah, I yeah. This is something that is as an innovator person. It's something that I can do, set the pathways and
Mm,
hope that people consensus start growing it. That's more
yeah.
like what I can hope for.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording and then